Hello and welcome to episode 315 of Retro Encounter, RPG Fans Weekly Podcast of Many Topics. I'm Mike Sollosi, and less than 12 hours ago, I finished a video game that has affected me emotionally and makes me, feel extra lonely in a way that is, I don't know, maybe says more about me than the game. But the game is Impostor Factory, and my podcast partner with me to talk about Impostor Factory today is Zach Wilkerson.
Hello.
Zach, you and I recorded an episode on Finding Paradise about a year ago.
Mm-hmm.
And Finding Paradise is the second game in the To the Moon Sigmund Corporation trilogy by Kangao. And Impostor Factory is the most recent game in the trilogy. It was released in late September of this year. And these games have been a bit of a Retro Encounter staple. We did an episode on To the Moon in, I believe, 2016 for our sort of indie games month. And I liked it a lot. And then in subsequent years, we played A Bird Story. I recorded an episode with Peter Triesenberg on that one. And then Finding Paradise, and then Impostor Factory. And even though for those first three, we sort of recorded those podcast episodes years after the games came out, we're doing this one recently because Impostor Factory is a 2021 game that both you and I were very excited about, and I think we both knew we would want to talk about it on a podcast not long after playing it. Is that fair?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I was very excited to talk about it. I, for a long time, wanted to review it, but it just didn't work out that way. So I'm excited to be able to share my thoughts this way.
And you were much more of a better fan than I was. You played it within a few weeks after it came out. I finished it again, like I mentioned, less than 12 hours ago in the first week of December. So I was distracted by other games and sort of kept putting it off because I wanted to be sort of fresh to talk about it on a podcast or for end of the year, game of the year stuff. But Zach, I really, really enjoyed it. This is a game that lives up to the promise of those earlier Kangao games, and it fulfilled my expectations and went and did some things that I sort of expected and was happy about, and then it completely subverted my expectations other times. Like, this is not a breezy, predictable game, but it is emotional and moving and fun, and I really enjoyed it. What were your early impressions after finishing it?
I mean, I thought it was lovely. I'm not sure if I like it. It's really hard for me to rank, those three games, but it's doing things in a different way. Like it's more linear in some ways than the first two. And it kind of breaks the mold of that. But then in some ways it's even more messing with what's happening in your head. So I think that I like that Kangao broke the mold here a little bit. I think that sort of the linearity of the center of the game makes it in some ways, I think, more obviously emotional. And I thought it was really, really moving and beautiful.
I think this is the most linear of these games. Maybe not A Bird Story, but A Bird Story is somewhat less meaty narratively than the other three. And again, it's a trilogy plus one because Bird Story is sort of the guide end chapter, I guess, of these. But Impostor Factory felt like the most linear of the major ones. You're like, the spaces you explore are more guided, and even they're not smaller. Like the mansion in Impostor Factory is as big as any environment in the previous two games, I think. But it's sort of, your objectives are clearer and you're somewhat more guided. So I think this was my shortest playthrough of those three, and the easiest to manage the exploration parts of, but still like a really beautiful high concept story that that is. I mean, I know that you aren't as into ranking things as I am, but my brain sort of mentally ranks everything I read, watch, or play. So that's a me problem, not an Impostor Factory problem. But I think that Finding Paradise is still my favorite, but this one is definitely worthy, definitely worth playing, definitely recommended. But I think I think you maybe sort of have to play all of them to be, because they are direct sequels that build upon one another.
I think that definitely the ending of Impostor Factory, which we'll get to, would lose a lot of impact if you haven't played the first two.
And the crazy thing is, for the first 75% of the game or so, I even thought to myself, this might be an ideal first game to play for people, like because it seems like a prequel. We'll get to that in a second, and and is definitely related to the other games in the series, but doesn't seem like it's a direct follow up to the story.
Mhm.
Because again, it's talking about events in the past and about the technology that's sort of at the core of the storyline for all of these. So I was thinking to myself, maybe someone could play this game first and then go to the Moon and not lose a lot, because because this is, in some ways, this is explaining the the background
Mhm.
to the earlier games. It's the Yakuza 0 of the Sigmund Corporation games. But that's not really the case at all. Like, when you get to the end, there are major callbacks to Finding Paradise and To the Moon that makes it very clear. Yeah, this is maybe not a direct sequel, but you should play this one after those two. I think I'm pretty confident in saying that.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, you could play it first, but I mean, first two are really good, so like, there's no reason to skip them.
Right? Yeah.
So it's not like this is like a much better technically game. It's not like saying like, oh, you can start with Yakuza 7 or whatever. You know what I mean? Like, it's like there's just no reason to skip the first two.
Total agreement. But we're sort of waffling around this game, talking about why we like it and why we recommend it, without really talking about the game yet. And we're in the first 7 minutes of the podcast. Maybe we should start at the beginning. For the whole game, the protagonist is a man named Quincy, who has a very nice brown jacket, and he's going to he's been invited to a party at a mansion that seems a little run down, but the guests are very wealthy, very connected. He's not really sure why he's at the party, and then suddenly, and he's the first person to arrive. He meets two professors named Haynes and Yu, and a young woman named Linry. But then when he exits and enters a few rooms, he finds the corpses of Dr. Yu and Dr. Haynes at the top, and then out of, like, him and the maid and butler coordinate a little bit, like, what's happened here. I don't know. I saw Linry leave the room. I don't know what's going on. He goes and washes his hands, and then when he leaves the bathroom, um, nothing has well, I should say, everything has been reset. Like, there's uh, the maid and butler are treating him like he just arrived to the house. Dr. Yanes and Dr. Yu and Dr. Haynes are alive, and Quincy is very, very puzzled. It's like nothing none of the murder that he witnessed ever happened.
Mhm.
And it then sort of history repeats itself a little bit. He meets the doctors and Linry and the party guests again. He plays with the cat, finds a key. You feel like you're in an old school adventure game for a second, and then he finds the corpses of the doctors again. But this time he's sort of left alone with them, and the maid thinks that he's probably the murderer. When in the first instance, the maid he and the maid discovered the bodies together. So he's being questioned by the other house guests. He escapes. He's chased into the bathroom this time. He washes his hands a little bit. He's incredibly shaken. He opens the door to the bathroom, and it's been reset again. Everyone like no one has any memory of what happened the previous two murder rooms. And Quincy's extremely bothered by all of this. He suspects that Linry might know more than she's letting on, because uh, because she's acted in an odd manner for
Mhm.
both of the previous events. And at this point, I'm thinking to myself, all right, I don't see any characters from To the Moon or Finding Paradise here. Is this a complete side game? Is it a murder mystery? Is it am I maybe trapped in someone's memory, and then but the memory is getting messed up? Because again, To the Moon and Finding Paradise are about a group of people that go into the memories of people that are in hospice, so that they can die with fewer regrets, or with positive memories instead of negative memories. It's kind of like in Inception, for like the elder care, and but in like with a sort of positively toned, like, it's a game
Mhm.
about memory and emotion, and trying to with this sci-fi bent. So I was expecting a game like that, but instead I'm trapped in this murder sim house. And so but again, I didn't know what was going on. I thought maybe Quincy would have to solve this. I was probably in someone's mind somehow, but I didn't really understand. What were you, for the first hour or so? Were you thinking a similar thing, or did you have a better idea of what was going on than I did?
No, I mean, was pretty much in the same boat. I mean, I sort of going in, I had knowledge that it was like part of the To the Moon, Sigmund Corp universe, and so like I was as you're walking in, I was thinking like, all right, and then when they die, and like others, obviously someone's memory is like in a loop. The actual answer didn't occur to me, but I definitely thought that there was something strange there. But the thing that struck me the most was honestly like the mansion itself. I like the fact that it was like self cleaning, and the rice bot, which is the best character in the game, like sort of being this like little like thing that goes around and gives you rice, being really amusing. And so like as I'm like playing it, I'm thinking like this must be in the future after Fighting Paradise and To the Moon, because the technology is so advanced that we don't see anything like that in those two games. So that was also part of what I was thinking. Obviously, that's not the way it turns out, but that was like the golden bathtub and all the cooks and stuff. So I thought it was a really compelling setting to start with as well.
Yeah, the mansion is so weird. There's a kitchen with 3 cooks working their tails off, even though there's only about 8 people at the party. There's a cleaner bot that is cleaning up after everything rapidly, and then Rice Bot, the most delightful side character of 2021, who exists only for cooking the best rice in the universe and for also providing emotional support. Like, wait, when you if you go up to Rice Bot at the party, like there's a dialogue option: eat rice, emotional support, and
Yeah.
both of those dialogue trees are very amusing. Right, Rice Bot's fantastic.
And the
Um,
emotional support is eat some rice.
I think so.
So
And,
delightful.
and this happens way later in the game, but like hours later, when you actually do get to eat some rice, Quincy is so overwhelmed by the deliciousness of the rice that he collapses. And like the and there's and he just has mental bubbles about rice for a full minute. The dialogue in this game is we've probably covered this in previous episodes. Kangao has a really wry sense of humor,
Mhm.
and he is like he finds he's able to create ridiculous or impossible situations and then treat them with gravity and levity. Like he'll joke about the events of the game and have people respond in ways that feel very real, but also very witty and funny. I really enjoy the sense of humor this game presents, even though most of it is about drama and tragedy and not comedy.
Mhm. I think it's one of the things that distinguishes these games in general, because they're so full of like weighty topics and weighty conversations and weighty ideas. But it's always like in the first two, it was like the interplay between Eva and Neil, and then here it's just Quincy is really funny and self-aware in like kind of a strange way. Yeah, I mean, I think that he's delightful. And obviously just the cat stuff is really funny. Yeah.
Oh yeah, geez. Like you find a cat that you interact with briefly to find a key, and then when the cat resurfaces later, it's I think every new room you see the cat in, he gets a little longer
Mhm.
until which point he's about as tall as a person. And then there's a Pokemon evolution scene that even has music that's a little bit similar to the evolving music in Pokemon, where he evolves into a cat with boxing gloves to defend you. And then not 2 minutes later, the cat encounters something so scary that it just flees the room. Like again, the sense of humor in this game, in like even when it's clashing against weighty topics or things that don't necessarily should be that aren't things that shouldn't necessarily be laughed at. The game will tell jokes and break up the drama and tension with humor in a way that this game is not a comedy, but it's sometimes funny, and that's very appreciated.
Yeah, I
And
mean, I think that all the games to some degree are about like finding joy, and I think that without that, it would be so dour throughout that it would be hard to kind of get what joy he's talking about.
and I made the comparison to Hospice earlier. In To the Moon and Finding Paradise, this is about a group of people who are encountering sad men who are close to death, and and sort of re-experiencing their memories. It's sad. If this was a real job, it would be depressing and even and soul destroying a little bit, kind of like a real hospice or elder care worker.
For sure.
That's very difficult, emotionally draining work. You really need to be you need to be able to find the joy in things to work that kind of job. And also the way Kangao handles things like hospitals. There's a lot of scenes in hospitals in these games, and and that makes me wonder if he did have to. Well, I think this is true. Like, a part of his pathos of writing To the Moon was about him or sort of reckoning with the death of his parents.
Hmm.
Um, or the deaths of his parents. So like there's a lot of scenes in hospitals, a lot of you know a lot of scenes about regret that make that I think these games would be unplayable if they didn't find the joy in some of these ideas. I'm really spinning off the rails here. We're only
No, no.
that mansion stuff is really only the first 30 minutes.
That's true, but there's only like 3 hours to talk about, so I think
That's
it's all
true.
right.
Yeah, I think if we try really hard, we can make this podcast episode shorter than the than the length of the game. I think that wasn't the case for A Bird Story, because I think A Bird Story really is only a 35-minute game, and Peter and I podcasted about it for about 40 minutes. That might be the only time in the history of Retro Encounter that's happened. But let's keep that streak alive. Um, Imposter Factory is the only one of these games that isn't about going and changing someone's memories.
Mhm.
This is only about sort of experiencing someone's memories and then and sort of learning from them. I think is sort of where you land on by the end of the game. But back to Quincy at the murder mansion. Um, uh, Eventually things get really surreal. Instead of going in and finding just the dead bodies of the two doctors, it's dozens of dead bodies
Mhm.
that, with that are only of the two doctors. And then he goes into another room, and the entire everyone in the party is dead instead of just the doctors. And then it gets reset again, and I'm wondering to myself, is like, are the cleaner bots that you found earlier in the game, which looks like the rice bot but is not rice bot. Rice bot is a special, unique child. Are the cleaner bots cleaning up after everybody, and Quincy's not noticing? I wasn't sure what's happening, and because the world resets every time he washes his hands, for a while you think that, oh, washing the hands is the act that is making all of this happen.
Mhm.
But eventually Linry, who has been sort of annoyed and somewhat impatient with Quincy by now, is like, all right, I wasn't planning for this to happen, but I think you should deserve to know what's going on. So she has Quincy go in through a room, which is a dark tunnel with a glowing door. And Quincy, basically through a series of these tunnels, um, sees most of Linry's life play out. Like
Mhm.
the after the first tunnel, it's Linry as a child on a school trip. Then you see scenes with her and her parents, and it's basically viewing the life of Linry with a sort of phantom Quincy observing all of it. And this is the bulk of the game. At like
Mhm.
probably about half of the game's playtime is Quincy going through Linry's life. And first, we should mention that Linry has some kind of degenerative disease, and as a child she collapses and goes to the hospital during this school trip. Her parents are worried if she'll survive into adulthood. At college, Linry is unusually driven to do a lot of work in neuroscience, because because she thinks that she might not have a lot of time left on this world, and needs to make some kind of impact. And when you learn that her work was on memory, and interfacing, and humans interfacing with recorded memories, made me think, oh, I get it now. This is a prequel, and Linry invents the technology that is in To the Moon and Finding Paradise.
Yeah.
That was my first thought after we sort of see the first several scenes of Linry's past. Where was your head at when this was going on?
That was pretty much where it was too. Yeah, and I think this is my favorite section of the game too. Just because like the way that Quincy ends up experiencing most of the memories is in like a very linear fashion, which again is very different from To the Moon, but he's like literally like walking from left to right like the whole time.
Sometimes you go up, sometimes you
Uh,
go down, but
yeah,
it's mostly left to right.
right. And the way that it will do it, like we'll just be like little patches and images of things as he's walking through sometimes, and the way that he kind of sees the progression of the memories. I thought like the visuals were really beautiful, and I thought the way that Gao was communicating things like just through visuals was really lovely. But yeah, I mean, I think and it's interesting. Like I actually thought, and I guess we'll talk about this in a minute. There's like a twist in terms of Linnery's relationship to characters in the first two. And interestingly, I thought that was possible when I was first playing, but eventually, as you get toward the end of this section, I did not think it was possible anymore. I was like, oh, I was wrong. And then I was right. So yeah, I really like this section.
We don't have to beat around the bush, really. Pretty early in this experiencing Linnery's life, Quincy encounters himself.
Mm-hmm.
He is Linnery's boyfriend, and and maybe later husband. I'm not sure if they get married.
I don't think they ever say.
And they don't really say, or at least there isn't a wedding ceremony. Linnery meets Memory Quincy at her university. They have a really sweet and beautiful courtship where Linnery is incredibly driven and hardworking, while Quincy is a liberal arts major who's a little bit more carefree. And they have different philosophies where Linnery says, well, I mean, she thinks and says openly, I don't know how much time I'll have left, so I feel like I need to make the most of my time here and make a real impact. While Quincy's philosophy is more, we should live in the moment and cherish the life we're given. But he doesn't have the same feelings of needing to make an impact on the world. Like but he's not a complete flake either. He's not just dancing through life like a certain character in Wicked. He believes in just just living life to your fullest every day. And he doesn't have a degenerative disease like Linnery has, but he lost his parents at a young age and eventually lost his grandmother, who raised him as a young adult. And so because he's experienced this kind of loss, he sort of adopted a philosophy of living your life to the fullest. But so his and Linnery's attitudes about living are not really the same, but they sort of complement each other in a way. And watching their courtship and their friendship blossoming into romance is really adorable. It is I have played through parts of Tales of Arise, and this is already the best romance story of the year. Like it is a really beautiful. I would almost call it a romantic comedy because it's about the relationship of these two characters, and there's some comedy and some misunderstanding, but it's still a serious game. And I love romantic things, and anyone that's listened to 5 episodes of the podcast can figure that out about me. But and I just thought this game was so sweet, especially since the different personalities of the very driven Linnery and the sort of like carefree poet Quincy are it's a beautiful relationship.
Yeah, I mean, I think that scene, like their first date,
On the
where
on the bridge.
on the
Yeah.
bridge, yeah,
Yeah.
where
Oh
he's
God, that's so nice.
recreating all the different like monuments and sites with all these like totally ridiculous things that a college student might do. I mean, obviously, like that is a lot for a first date, but I think that just the simple nature of it, I thought that was really lovely. And their interplay is just so, I think, realistic too. Like I just feel like these are the kinds of people who would talk to each other this way. I mean, I think Quincy is almost like maybe too nice of a person sometimes over the course of this game, but I think that you would have to be that patient, and you can see what attracts them to each other, and they show so much of who they are together that you can believe and buy into who they are, and you're like really rooting for them. I thought it was really beautifully romantic, and I thought it was amazing.
And I mean, this game visually looks like a 16-bit RPG, which is sort of the aesthetic that Freebird Games and Kangao always go for. And it's ridiculous sci-fi situations about jumping into people's memories and again, finding paradise is sort of about defeating someone's imaginary friend who has turned into a rogue AI. Uh, and then we'll talk about her a little bit later as well. But like Quincy and Linry's relationship really does feel like two real people. One sort of intellectual woman who's very driven, but does want comfort and support in a way, and Quincy who is almost way too nice and patient for the things he goes through in this game, and but is eminently likable. Their dialogue feels believable, even though this game is impossible.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, and I think that when they do start hitting those roadblocks, not to get ahead of us, but we eventually discover that Linry gets a job working for like a neuroscience place with a lot of characters that we saw at the beginning, and as she has that job and isn't at home as much, I think it also realistically looks at the problems that they would have, and kind of what those interplay of those dynamics would look like.
Yeah, that's the point where I think I mentioned this before. I thought this game was about inventing the technology that is core to the moon and finding paradise. Because
Mhm.
when Linry gets this job at a foundation, like they it looks like that they are in the process of developing that technology, and they found Linry's paper on encoding human memories, and they're like, oh, this young scientist woman has discovered part of our technology without any help from us at all. It looks like she would be a valuable asset down the line. So they hire her, and I was a little bit wrong. Linry's not the inventor of this technology, but she's definitely part of the group that did invent it. So she starts working for this foundation. It's a secret bunker under the mansion that is the real version of the mansion that we're in a weird murder simulation of in the beginning of the game. The two doctors that keep dying in that simulation are the two sort of CEO founders of this foundation,
Mhm.
and for a while, um, Linry and Quincy have not been dating for long. The adorable date on this is only a couple days or weeks after the adorable date on the bridge where he makes an Eiffel Tower out of rooms for her. Uh, but their relationship starts to fracture a little bit, where Linry, who is again still very, very driven, keeps working later and later, is determined to accomplish this in her life before but before things take a turn for the worse, and they start drifting apart somewhat, but not in a way that they don't have a knockdown drag out argument. It's just like Quincy just keeps up staying later and later for her, and is obviously sad, and Linry's project moves along so much further that she considers just moving into the facility and not living with Quincy anymore, and which would just completely break his heart. Their relationship is tested here,
Mhm.
but then it comes to an unusual head when on one rare day when Linry doesn't arrive early for work. She sleeps in a little bit and has a discussion with Quincy or something. I don't remember exactly, but because she's slightly late for work, she was going to be the test subject for a big demonstration, but instead, because she was late, one of her other coworkers volunteers instead, and the demonstration goes poorly, and the worker passes away. And so, like,
Mhm.
she arrives to work with him being wheeled out in an ambulance, and that just completely shocks her. It's like, is it my fault he died because I was late? It's like if I was on time, would I have died instead of him? I sort of volunteered for the experiment because I knew I didn't have a lot of time left on the world, and I might be an ideal candidate for the test subject. And so she blames herself. She's shaken. The two doctors do not blame her. They want her to stay on with the foundation, but she just can't handle it anymore. So she apologizes to Quincy, and they go and travel the world for I think a full year,
Yeah.
like in
And
in a way that she never thought she would be able to, and almost as an apology to him. It feels like.
yeah, and I think to kind of back up slightly for a second, I think that one of the things that when I was talking about how it tells the story visually, one of the things that I really liked was how it so consistently have you like playing as Lynn Rain. You walk in and you can just sort of see how it's later and later, and Quincy is there, and up later and later, and how it just communicates that in really subtle ways that I think are really accurate to I don't know, people in relationships that I've known. And one of the things that I think this game does really well too is there's a conversation before she goes in late that morning. And where basically she says like, "Hey, Quincy, like you knew what you were getting into. I told you what this was going to be." And he's, there's this uncertainty about what she's going to do, but it actually, like, I think one of the things that this game does, and shortly after it does this as well, it makes us really think about like what is the right thing to do. And I don't know, like obviously the work she's doing is significant and important, and I get that. But you also see like the happiness that she has with Quincy, and like you can understand both of their perspectives so well, and there doesn't seem to be like a right answer. And I love that it asks the question, and even by the end it doesn't necessarily provide us with an answer as to what was right in any of these circumstances. And I think it's really lovely, and the way that it does it visually a lot of the time I think is really cool too.
Yeah, building on two things that you said, uh, this relationship feels really real. Like one more romantic person and one more workaholic person who love each other and don't want to give up each other, but are being pulled in these different directions. Feels like a real story. Like we probably know people that have experienced a version of that kind of relationship, even though this is about this is a memory diving science fiction world that we're living in. It's crazy. You mentioned at how good Kangao is at telling a story with only images and sort of just with like subtle situations and not explicit dialogue all the time. I feel like he really honed that in A Bird Story, which again is the sort of
Yeah.
guide end chapter of this series that he's been working on for 10 years. A Bird Story is basically a video game version of a silent movie. There's no dialogue.
Mhm.
There is the passage of time and progress, but it's only about a little boy and his relationship with an injured bird that he finds. That is told just incredibly beautifully without any dialogue. And I think that because Kangao likes that kind of storytelling, that is with sort of player driven sequences of images and scenes without dialogue, that makes him unusually well suited to sort of crafting the cinematography of that kind of scene in more dialogue heavy games like Finding Paradise and Impostor Factory. He's super good at it. And the one other thing I want to mention before we move on to the end game of the story is the music in this game.
Oh, yeah.
Kan Gao composes all the music himself. These aren't games made entirely by one person. If you look at the credits, Kan Gao receives assistance for things like the more complicated modeling and visual design. These are his games. This is about as auteur as you can
Mhm.
get in a video game, short of a Stardew Valley or an Undertale. But yeah, Kangao does have help, but it's all his writing, all of his narrative design, and all of his music. These games are almost like you're listening to a chamber orchestra or sometimes solo piano concerto
Mhm.
of a game. They're like a tone poem. It's just a sort
Yeah.
of a lengthy musical performance with a story to follow along, and it's the musical cues. I don't think they're quite as devastating emotionally to me as they were in Finding Paradise,
Yeah.
because Finding Paradise is a story about two musicians and them playing with each other, or even hearing one of them play in the background while one is doing something else is part of the story. But it is just so beautifully presented, especially the sort of small orchestra and solo piano in Imposter Factory is just so beautiful.
Yeah, I mean, and I think that that's one of the reasons these games appeal to me so much. And I think that, um, while I don't think the music here is quite as impactful as it is in the previous two games, I do think that the visuals are maybe more impactful, and you can just see sort of. And I like, I don't know, pretentious movies, some people would say, that are told mostly like with visuals and sounds and things like that. And thinking about movies in that way, and thinking about and liking movies for that reason, I feel like he um, is one of the better game makers at being able to pull the different elements of what would make cinema into a video game in a way that only a video game could do. And I think that's one of the things that makes these games so remarkable.
Yeah, I think that Kan Gao has just gotten better at this. Like
Mhm.
there are more sort of subtle visual cues and sort of still image storytelling in Imposter Factory than there were in Finding Paradise, and it's just because it's Kan Gao's just gotten more comfortable telling this kind of story, even though the musical cues aren't maybe quite as elaborate. but
Mhm.
but like you said, this is the only this could have been a well-made indie film or prestige television series, and it would
Mhm.
still be good. But
Mhm.
the choices that they make in this game really can only be told in a game. Like that Pokemon evolution scene I mentioned before could only be in a video game.
Mhm.
And the sort of storytelling device of the player exploring a space as Quincy or Linry, picking up those memento items as like small rewards for viewing a scene, and then not being able to go to the next zone or next scene until you collect all the mementos. That is an extremely video gamey thing,
Mhm.
and a video game player is extremely comfortable doing that kind of thing. But it basically makes the player explore a space in a not exactly linear way that you can't communicate the same way in a film.
Mhm.
And because of that, like Kangao has just gotten better at this kind of storytelling, and I think that Imposter Factory, even though I don't think it's my favorite of his games exactly, I think it's just sort of the most sophisticatedly, it's made in the most sophisticated manner because again, I've said 5 times already, he's gotten better at it.
Mhm. I
But
agree.
yeah, but back to the story a little bit. Um, so it looks like that Quincy and Linry's relationship is on the verge of collapse because of Linry's job and them having sort of slightly different expectations in their relationship, which again is extremely normal and feels real to me. But, not necessarily being in a relationship like that, but knowing it and seeing it. Uh, Linry leaves her job and they travel the world for a while. Like Quincy has done a little bit himself and promised that him and Linry would eventually do together. There's a really beautiful series of scenes where they look at almost all the landmarks that Quincy had made for
Mhm.
her on the bridge and on
Oh,
their
it's
first
lovely.
date. Yeah, and it's crazy. Those scenes like with the Eiffel Tower and the pyramids and in Venice, each of them is maybe 30 seconds,
Mhm.
and you can tell that this is just a really beautifully made pixel portrait.
Mhm.
There's a lot of effort that went into this pixel art, huge multi-screen version of the Eiffel Tower and a balcony where they're seeing it from. But it's only in the game for 30 minutes.
Yeah.
It's a huge amount of craft
I
just for a single image.
I also love that they actually like put you in the places that you would actually be if you're looking at these things. Like I'm not sure if you've ever been to Paris, but
I
like that
have.
is like the actual overlook like area that like everybody takes their Eiffel Tower photos in. I was like, oh, that's just like a cool little detail that like made that sing a little bit more for me.
I wonder if Gao himself went to to Paris and Stonehenge and all these places to get the correct mise en scène when he recreated them in the game.
It certainly seemed like at some point he had been to at least that place. I haven't been to a lot of those other places, but I have been to the Eiffel Tower, and I was like, oh wow, I remember being that exact spot.
It yeah, it again like it feels very real for this being a, a ridiculous video game that rewards you with colorful spheres whenever you see a new scene. But on their return trip, I think even in the airport, Linry feels very sick suddenly, and my brain is going, oh no, her disease is resurfacing again, and now they're gonna rip her away from us, the player, tragically. Uh, but no, she's not sick because of her condition. She's pregnant, and they're both really excited. They're nervous and excited. And Linry's concerned about her condition in a way that a new parent definitely would be. But then uh, things seem to be going well until they don't anymore, and Linry's condition does resurface, and the doctor basically tells them, well, we could treat your condition right now and it would compromise the health and safety of the baby, but your outcome would be very, very positive. Or we can delay operation so that the baby can be delivered in a healthy window, but then that would compromise your health
Mm-hmm.
and you might not survive, Linry. So that is again an impossible choice,
Mm-hmm.
just completely devastating, and Linry and Quincy don't know what to do, um, and they eventually settle on like Quincy telling Linry, "Look, I can't lose. I don't want to lose you. Let's let's treat your condition now." And so they do, and their baby is born, but with some underdeveloped organs and not very healthy. There's just some really sad scenes of their son Tobias or Toby growing up with them. Toby is in a wheelchair a lot of the time. He's hooked up to a respirator or similar devices a lot of the time. You see scenes of Linry reading the Little Prince to him, and because the Little Prince is sort of partially about journeying to the moon and stars, it brings back her relationship with her father, who had a deep conversation with her about observing the stars when she was a child. It's really sad, and I sort of felt it was going to end this way, but it does end with Tobias dying young, somewhat unexpectedly, and if Linry's um, workaholic tendencies almost sort of ruined her relationship with Quincy before, they definitely did this time. Uh, Linry goes back to the foundation, moves into the facility there, and just completely loses herself in work. And then from there, like sort of as those scenes progress, and you see her ignoring phone calls, definitely from either Quincy or her parents, you sort of know the relationship's over.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it's like I said, it's one of those moments where, as I'm watching it, like when they're deciding on what they're going to do about the baby and the disease, where I'm like, I don't know that there, I mean, there's no good option here, and all the options are poor, um, and yeah, and I think that again, getting back to the idea of visual storytelling after Toby dies, like you see that that's like a wordless story from there until essentially the end of our story, right? Where you can see the split again, and it feels exactly like what would probably have happened in this situation. And I think that one of the things we haven't touched on is I love kind of throughout this game at the beginning and then here, or at the beginning of the sequence, the way that parents are dealing with their sick children and like how realistic that is and how much care they have for them. I think really also like makes these characters so much more lovable and so much more realistic. But yeah, it's a really heartbreaking, devastating moment.
Yeah. Oh man. Rolling it back a little ways, the way Linry's parents interact with Linry as a child and as a college student, where they're clearly so devastated that Linry probably won't live a full life, but the way that they just treat it with such love and compassion
Mm-hmm.
is beautiful to see, but also just totally heartbreaking. And then the scenes almost repeating themselves that way with Quincy and Linry and how they raise Tobias with so much love and compassion, but with this underlying this won't end happily, is just completely devastating.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, yeah, I thought it was beautifully done. I didn't think that it quite had the emotional impact of maybe say To the Moon or even Finding Paradise, because there's not like that twist punch. I mean, there's a twist here that we're about to talk about, but it doesn't have that same impact, I guess. But I thought that it was maybe more relatable than those two were to some degree.
Yeah, I mean, all three of these stories are very, very human games.
Mm-hmm.
They these the way that characters talk and react feels way too real for being a game that's presented in vaguely 16-bit sprites. But moving forward, as we see these scenes after Quincy and Linry break up, and we see them both visibly age. It ends with Linry working at the Foundation's facility with her hair graying and her clearly entering middle age. But while at the scenes at the house party at the beginning, she is still a young woman with red hair. Like, and you're still controlling this phantom version of Quincy. It becomes extremely clear that Quincy is viewing the memories of Linry that have happened long ago, but because your form is still of a young Quincy, he sort of realizes, okay, I'm not the Quincy in this story. The Quincy in this story is her memory of her ex-boyfriend, and I am some kind of recreation of him.
Mm-hmm.
And they confirm that where after you reach the end of the story, basically the present day, where Linry is working on a final version of the prototype of the memory reader or memory editor that we see in To the Moon and Finding Paradise. But and she even transforms from a young woman into a middle-aged woman in front of the player-controlled Quincy, and says, "Yes, basically, I'm running this as a simulation for final testing before we show it to investors, because I don't want something to happen like what happened to my coworker years ago when he died during a failed test. And I'm just running these simulations over and over. I created you as an observer. Why did I use the form of my ex-boyfriend? I don't know. I'm a little bit stunted emotionally from all of this. Uh, but I still need you to help me with a couple tests." So for this part of the game, you know that there's something going wrong with the machine. So so Quincy, as an observer, accompanied by Longcat and Ricebot, again the two greatest characters in of 2021, um, you basically enter and re-enter rooms until everyone in the room dies suddenly, and sometimes it happens after like 2 entrances, sometimes after 5. And Ricebot says, "Okay, recording data, thank you. Let's go to the next room." And like for a while, it's just completely surreal. While basically Quincy, trying to, you know, like figure out, just sort of dealing with the knowledge that he is not a real person and an AI created for the simulation, while entering and exiting rooms until people die horribly, is it's real weird. And even though you know Quincy is an AI and not a real person, you really start sort of like sympathizing with his struggle, or not understanding his struggle, but just feeling kind of bad for him, because what Linry is putting him through is a little messed up. But after all of that happens, Linry still isn't really sure why these anomalous deaths are happening. So she has Quincy and the cat go into the basement facility where sort of the server room is, or the memory device is. And this is when the game starts to get as surreal as it gets. A shadowy, vaguely Lovecraftian horror destroys the machine, shutting down the simulation, and then forms into Faye, the imaginary friend rogue AI from Finding Paradise.
Yeah, I
Who's
was not expecting that.
she's never identified by name, but if you've played Finding Paradise, she's unmistakably that Faye.
Yeah.
And sort of, and she even mentions, "Oh yeah, you guys are bound by the rules of physics here, but physics are more like guidelines for me." And so she summons, birds and paper planes, which again are huge visual motifs from Finding Paradise, and takes and explains to Linry and Quincy that, well, this isn't exactly the real human Linry running a simulation. Really is, I am running hundreds or maybe thousands of simulations involving Linry and Quincy and all of the different paths they might have taken in life. And this is actually the final one. This is the last simulation on the top of stacks of simulations that I've been running over and over. And so Linry and Quincy are very confused, but go on a paper airplane journey with Faye, uh, like through this metaphysical uh like false memory, and then they sort of tell you what the real story is from this
Mhm.
point on. So should we go into that, or just want to talk about how weird it is seeing Faye again?
I mean, as I said, as we were talking about, like this was not what I was expecting. Like really did not see like the stacks upon stacks of um, ideas coming through, and because we hadn't seen the characters from the previous 2 games, like if you told me that the first character I was going to see was Faye, that would not have been my expectation. But I mean, it makes sense once you understand it. But yeah, and I think that at first I was thinking, oh, really, you're just telling me this is all AI and it's not real, but I think the way they wrap it up, as we'll talk about in a second here, ends up still maintaining the emotional core of the game for me.
Yeah, and Faye tells Linry and Quincy, or the AI versions of them, like, yeah, this is the we've been running simulations over and over on top of each other, and we're at the top of the Jenga stack right now. It's very unstable, so we have to end this simulation and sort of go all the way back down to base. Otherwise, all of this will go very badly.
Mhm.
And she through these, metaphors of going through memory via paper airplane, and just all the moving visual choices that Kangao makes in these games. She explains to them that these simulations were all about Linry and Quincy, but not but the story that they saw of of Tobias being born and dying young and Linry going back to the Foundation, none of that, all of that is fiction. It is a simulation of them making certain choices.
Hmm.
And the truth of the matter is that in the real world, like out of the simulation, in the real world, they decided to delay Linry's operation so that their son could have the best possible window to being born healthy. And they don't name the baby in this timeline. They don't name their baby Tobias. They named their baby Neil. And so this is Neil Watts, the one of the main characters of To the Moon and Finding Paradise. And Linry and Quincy are his parents. So Neil is born healthy, but it compromises Linry's health quite a bit. So they recreate some of the scenes that we saw with the sick and wheelchair bound Tobias, but instead it's Linry in the wheelchair of them doing things like visiting a playground,
Hmm.
or viewing scenes from their son at school, and we see Neil grow up and Linry get increasingly sick until she passes away. But then Neil is diagnosed with the same degenerative disease that afflicted Linry, which ties back to Finding Paradise, where we see Neil getting very sick and taking some risky medication during the sort of towards the end of that game. Um, and Neil tries to get a job at the same foundation where his mother used to work at, but is rejected, possibly because of his legacy there. They think he might compromise their work. So instead, he gets a job at Sigmund Corporation, using the same technology that the foundation developed for these for this memory editing service that is provided in To the Moon and Finding Paradise. And so the Phantom, Linry, and Quincy watching this, in a way, they're happy seeing their son grow up to be a healthy and successful young man, healthy other than this disease that Linry passed on to him, but also just sad that their relationship still ends somewhat tragically, since Linry dies younger than she should have, and they don't get to see their they don't get to have a full life together. And so there's some relief in seeing their son survive, and then more tragedy in knowing that even though they stay together, Linda dies young. Because of this, I don't know what you want to call it, a sliding doors moment, or a decision point moment, but like
Hmm.
the fact that you're watching a simulation of how one decision can change multiple lives and affect this relationship that we've grown very attached to, it was really affecting. I did not exactly weep at this at this point of the story, because I don't know, this is the kind of shenanigans I expect from them by now.
Hmm.
But this is when the game just stopped being about one relationship and tied itself to the greater Sigmund Corporation trilogy story in a way that was really interesting and satisfying.
Oh yeah, I agree. And I think that to me, the most moving part of it is like the AI version of Linry, being able to see like that in real life she made a different choice, and like obviously the way that regret had sort of pressed her forward within that simulation, I thought was really really deeply moving. That was like that she got to see the truth of it, and that was the decision that she wishes she had made, I suppose. So yeah, I mean, I think that um, the connection to Neil, I think, is really moving too. This idea that he's obviously working through something with his mom, and the care that he obviously has for her. And given that it's a simulation, like obviously how much he liked his dad too, because Quincy's such a nice guy,
Yeah.
I think is really compelling.
Well, I don't think it's Neil's influence that shows Quincy as an endlessly nice and patient guy. It's Linry's,
Oh yeah,
because
because she's using her memories. Yeah.
yeah, at the end of the simulation, or I should say, at the end of those scenes, they reveal that Linry went to her old contacts at the foundation, old silly Dr. Kim, who I think was one of the creators of Ricebot. Again, Ricebot, one of the top two characters of 2021. Um, uh, and she uses the foundation's technology to create a living memory that she can give to her son after he grows up. So what we're playing through now is a simulation um, made from Linry's memories before she passed away, starring fake AI versions of Linry and Quincy. But how does Faye enter this exactly? It's because that this memory provided by Linry is being viewed by Neil, her son, as an adult using probably stolen technology from his job.
For sure.
Yeah, definitely stolen technology from his job to view the memory, the memory software that his mother had left him, and he's running this simulation with the assistance of Faye, the rogue AI, to see what might have happened if different choices had been made, and this AI Quincy and AI Linry aren't exactly real, but like having them experience a different timeline and then see the true timeline is relieving and satisfying to them in a way that is like very weird explaining it out loud, but really, a really moving plot point overall.
Yeah, I mean, I think it asks questions about like how we value AI and like consciousness and things like that. But by the time we get to this point, whether it's AI or not, is kind of irrelevant to us because these are
Yeah,
the people we've spent all this time with.
yeah,
Um,
they're real to us,
yeah,
regardless of what they are in the context of the story.
yeah, and so like I think that it it has the same emotional impact, maybe even more so because of the way that it ends and the opportunities that Neil gives them to do something different.
Yeah, almost as a reward for what she put them through. Faye takes the it takes the AI versions of Quincy and Linry. She takes them to the moon, where all of the other surviving AI versions of Quincy and Linry from the multiple simulations are all sort of resting. She sort of consolidates them all into a single Quincy and Linry, and then creates a new timeline where where Linry and Neil both survive healthy through their procedures and childbirth, and live a happy, fulfilling life. Like you see a slideshow of sorts again in that silent storytelling way that Kanga was brilliant at, where every outcome is the happiest outcome, sort
Mhm.
of almost like again rewarding them for everything they've been through over the course of these simulations, and it's very sweet. You see Neil grow up as sort of a nerdy teenager who has uh, Ava, the main character of To the Moon and Finding Paradise, or co-main character along with Neil, as sort of a childhood friend where their friendship blossoms into romance and marriage, which I think is looking a little bit at the at Neil's subconscious feelings for
Indeed.
for the real Eva. Um, and you basically get to see Linry and Quincy grow old together and meet their grandchildren, and and sort of and leave on their own terms, where just before like Faye shuts down the simulation.
Mhm.
And when that simulation shuts down, you see Neil sort of wake up from his the first credits roll, and then you see Neil wake up from his detach himself from the memory editing machine, having sort of viewed his mother's entire memory, and then a few uh, simulations where she made different choices, and ultimately, I think probably feeling okay about the choices his mother made for his sake, even
Mhm.
though he definitely misses her, and maybe wonders what might have happened if she made different choices. But that simulation gave him the if not a perfect answer, as thorough an answer as he could have gotten.
Mhm.
And it ends with him leaving to go with his coworkers to maybe a bar, maybe out for ice cream, and not exactly certain, but
Yeah.
with some sort of an open ended kind of Neil's going to continue his work, and maybe part of why Neil is so unusually driven and even and acerbic is because of who his mother is.
Mhm.
And,
Yeah.
and he's probably as dedicated to um, mastering this memory technology and maybe curing his own illness as she was.
Yeah. I mean, I think that it frames the game as sort of and you see this sort of through the simulations. And I was talking about this earlier about like relationships between parents and children and sort of what that means. But I like the way that it ties it up there at the end, and sort of his desire to give his mom a happy ending that she couldn't have. How much that means, I guess, is a question that is, I don't know, up for debate or philosophical, but just the way in which I think that he's dealing with his emotions on that. But also how driven he is to kind of master this technology in its own way. I think is interesting from like a lore story perspective, but also from a characterization perspective for Neil, who we don't know that well in the first two, but I feel like I know him a lot better based on him doing this.
And this goes back to the idea of Kan Gao's design influence being related to the him sort of reconciling with the death of his parents.
Mm-hmm.
Like I hope I'm not over philosophizing here, but I think Kan Gao wonders how his life might have changed if he or his parents had made a few different specific choices.
Mm-hmm.
And this game is sort of like is sort of telling a story where you play out scenarios where different choices were made that feels really that feels extremely true to the story that he wanted to tell, if that makes sense. Like
Yeah, absolutely.
this is a very human story where they do impossible things but still like retain an emotional core that about relationships and parents with their children and suffering and what living your life to the fullest means. And they say this later in the story that in a conversation between Quincy and Linry that or maybe it's Linry and her father. Linry always felt that because her time on this earth was limited, she had to make an impact. But then her conversation partner responds with, "Well, if if someone really loves you and cherishes you, isn't that enough of an impact?"
Right.
And that is an incredibly beautiful sentiment, and
Mm-hmm.
just one of many beautiful things about this game. And listeners, you maybe you've played this game if you're listening to this podcast, maybe you haven't. I know I listen to video game and movie podcasts where I haven't always played the game or watched the movie, and still definitely get enjoyment and value out of it. So I'm not saying you need to play this game to listen to the podcast, but I hope that that listening to this podcast at least makes you more interested in this game or appreciate this game at a slightly different level, because this is the whole trilogy is a moving series of video games that could only really be told through a video game, and I wholeheartedly recommend any of them. I wholeheartedly recommend all of them to people with the patience to play this kind of game, because this is, again, this is not a Michael Bay blockbuster with that is action packed and has moments of catharsis and violence that are satisfying in their own way. This is an indie film about a relationship between two or three people that is not that has no violence, and whose only satisfaction comes from just, the like the emotions that the player goes through. And if that sounds like your kind of game, then I think the Kangao trilogy, starting with To the Moon, are must plays.
Yeah, and if you're ambitious, you could clear them all out in one day, And I think that there's more emotional truth and more emotional impact and more emotional weight in the 3.5, 4 hours you play Impostor Factory than there are in the vast majority of AAA games. But I know sounds like reductive, but it's the truth. I mean, that's what you're looking for, and that's what you want out of your game is story, emotion. Then you come to the right place with any of these games, and the way that he shows his philosophies about life by approaching it from so many different angles in these three games, I think is really interesting. And we call it a trilogy, but even in the end credits, it shows that this story is going to continue, which I think is
Yes,
excellent.
it shows To the Moon as game number one, and then the two sort of Sigmund Files DLC free games as games sort of 1A and 1B. Then Finding Paradise as game two, and A Bird Story as sort of game 2A, even though A Bird Story came out before Finding Paradise. And but they didn't identify Impostor Factory as game three. They called it game X because
Mhm.
this game could take place. Well, it definitely takes place after Impostor Factory. Excuse me. It takes place after Finding Paradise because Faye is a major character. But it could take place after a game 3 or 4 or before a game 3 or 4, because this isn't about like the next thing that happens to Neil. This is about Neil experiencing his mother's memories to better understand his relationship with his parents.
Mhm.
So that, like, this is Game X. It is basically a large guide and chapter. If you like, and that will probably make more sense if Kangao eventually gets to 10 games and is able to put them all in an order somehow. But this story will continue because there are definitely more things that Neil and Eva and Faye and all the others will go through before Kangao's ready to retire from making video games, and that is really exciting to me because in the four of these that I have played, there is not a dud among
Agreed.
them. Retro Encounter does have maybe a few duds in our 300 episode run, but I don't think today was one of them. Thank you so much, Zach, for helping me sort out my feelings after playing this very emotional game.
Absolutely. I mean, you haven't really had time to process yet. I have, so yeah.
Yeah, I finished Shin Megami Tensei 5 and Impostor Factory like within 2 days of each other, and I played SMT 5 for like 70 hours and Impostor Factory for about 3 hours, and I think the one that that is more impactful to me was was Imposter Factory,
I can
and
believe it.
but Shin Megami Tensei 5 I play for a bunch of gameplay reasons, and Imposter Factor I played for a bunch of story reasons, and I think that's just how I'm feeling about these games now. But I still have to sort out my feelings about both of them before I get to writing my Game of the Year piece.
Mhm.
But I've talked about Game of the Year pieces multiple times in the past couple episodes, listeners, because that is looming very very large right now in the up to RPG fan staff, and hopefully we
Sure
will
is.
have we'll have our Game of the Year stuff out. Hopefully by around the new year, but I can't say exactly when that'll happen. And then Zach, you're going to be one of the people working extra hard on those features.
Yeah, even as the person who's in charge, I can't tell you exactly when it'll be out.
Yeah, but hopefully they'll be out in a somewhat timely manner. And I can tell you that I will talk about SMT5 and Imposter Factory whenever I write something for end of the year. But we're not quite at the end of the year yet, right? We have 3 more episodes in December before we have to change our calendars, and the next 2 will be on Final Fantasy V, the 1992 or 1993 classic. On for the Super Famicom that was later ported to the PlayStation and Game Boy Advance, and now a pixel remaster version on PC and probably other places I'm forgetting. Final Fantasy V is excellent. I really really like that game, but I'm passing on those episodes this month because I have some other things I want to take care of. But we're going to have 2 episodes on Final Fantasy V very soon, and I'm really excited to listen to them and see how they turn out because Final Fantasy V is great. But but also in December we're doing our annual year end episode about the games we played in 2021. We've only just started planning that out, and I really want to knock out at least one more game before before we record that. So we'll see how that turns out. And we've started to plan out January of 2022. We're definitely having 2 episodes on Skies of Arcadia, hosted by Alana. That game completely annihilated the other games in the public poll that we held to determine what the first game of 2022 on Retro Encounter would be. So we're going to have an enthusiastic panel talking about Skies next month, and I think we're also going to do an episode on our favorite games for the PlayStation 2. The PS2 has a hell of an RPG library, a lot to discuss there. I think that is going to be maybe our first episode of 2022, but we've only just started figuring it out yet. And after we can schedule that around people's holiday vacations, we will have more information on it for you in the next few weeks. But if you want some listeners, if you want some more information from us, the best way to reach out to us is to email retro@rpgfan.com. You can also visit rpgfan.com's main website and forums. Also, our Facebook page, our Instagram, Twitter, Discord, YouTube, and Twitch. All of them are called RPG Fan or RPG Fan.com. Please interact with RPG Fan in however manner you choose to do so. We also have 3 other fine podcasts to listen to in the RPG Fan Podcast Network. Random Encounter every 2 weeks about current games and randomness. Rhythm Encounter also every 2 weeks about a variety of music-related RPG topics, as well as sort of a listening party for RPG music every 2 weeks. And also Phoenix Edge, which is posts somewhat sporadically, but is mostly about current events with RPGs and usually hosted live on YouTube whenever they record. You can review those 3 podcasts or Retro Encounter on Apple Podcasts, Google Play, Spotify, basically any podcast venue that you choose. But so please leave feedback for all of our podcasts. We love feedback, 5 stars, 5 stars, however you like to do so. But if you would like to reach out to us as individuals and not as a podcast or a website, let's share our social media with them, Zach.
You can email me, zachw at rpgfan.com, or you can also get me on the RPG Fan Discord at zachw.
And as for me, I am easiest to find on Twitter. I am attached to that website like a tumor, and I wish I wasn't, but alas, I am. I'm most of the time at the real Monsoon, other times at Evoker for Dogs, and on RPG Fans Discord, I am Monsoon Mike. Okay, so this simulation's over. I guess we should just reset and start again and see how it happens the second time.
Good plan.
Thank you. Good night. Good luck.